So you've just started playing Final Fantasy XIV and you're intrigued to learn that it has controller support. Now over the years, I've had a lot of people ask me, is controller as good as keyboard and mouse? Can they still compete at the same levels? Or some people don't even ask. They just assume that controller players are worse or can't do serious content for whatever reason. It baffles me because 14's controller support isn't just good, it's top of the line. It's so good that the producer doesn't even want to file a trademark for it because he wants other games to copy it for accessibility purposes. I've done world first progression levels of raiding with controller players and seen them top the charts on all the different roles. And these are not just console players. These are controller players on PC. So people are very actively choosing to use the tool that they are most comfortable with and performing on it. So today, while I may prefer keyboard and mouse, I just wanted to do a quick video to appreciate Final Fantasy XIV's controller support and show off just a couple of its nifty features. I wouldn't call this a controller gameplay guide. For that, maybe check out Work to Games controller guides. They do a ton of them. So the first thing I want to do is dispel what I think is the most misleading bit of information I see going around about controller: lack of hotbar space. Now, to understand how to get the most out of it, you definitely need to become familiar with your cross hotbar and custom hotbar settings in your character configuration menu. Honestly, I probably need to do a video for this stuff on the regular hotbars as well. So by default, controllers have access to 16 buttons. By holding the left or right trigger, you can then press any of the 4 face buttons or 4 directional pad buttons to perform the appropriate keybound action. You can also change this hold to be a toggle or a mix of both, but I personally prefer to just set it to hold. Also, by tapping R1, you can cycle through separate cross hotbar presets. These are basically like 8 different hotbars that you can set for your cross hotbar. You can also hold R1 to switch to them manually, and when you want to actually edit skills on the other ones, you do need to swap to them on your main cross hotbar set. Now, some people think it ends there, or that if you want to access more than 16 buttons, you have to do that R1 cycling I mentioned, but that's not the case. There's actually 2 other settings you can turn on in your custom hotbar settings that give you a lot more real estate when it comes to your hotbar. The first option allows you to access up to 16 more buttons by holding one of your triggers down and then holding the opposite, so holding right trigger and then holding left trigger afterwards, and vice versa. Then you can also enable another 16 buttons from double tapping the same trigger, so pressing R2 or L2 twice in a row. The double tapped hotbar, called the double cross hotbar, can even be used as a display and separated from the cross hotbar and moved around the screen. I, for example, would use it to track cooldowns since I probably won't be using that many buttons on most jobs. On PC, you can also set up normal hotbars to track your cooldowns, or just things that you want to click that you don't really use in combat, like a mount or a minion or something like that. You can even click them with the controller by holding L1 and then pressing R3 to activate mouse mode. I seldom use this, but it is there. So with that, we have cooldown tracking, up to 48 easy access buttons. So yeah, hotbar real estate isn't an issue. What job really needs 48 buttons? And that's not to mention that, again, you can set up mounts and other things on separate hotbars on PC or on those later cross hotbar presets that you don't use in combat. You can even choose how your R1 tap cycles through these, whether or not you are in combat. So there's tons of settings for this stuff. Honestly, there's so many that on jobs that don't need nearly this much real estate, I sometimes bind the same button to multiple things. Sometimes I'm just more comfortable really quickly getting to an action via a different input than normal. Or again, I'm just putting it on that third hotbar in order to track it and separate it and put it somewhere on the screen. Now, I'm sure there are other things that maybe your thinking controller might struggle with, targeting allies to heal them, or using skills on them, maybe placing ground AoE, so let's cover a few of those. Now, for targeting party members, you will need to cycle through them using the D-pad. Pressing down will start you from the top of your party list and then go down, and pressing up will start you from the bottom and move up. I did an entire controller series years and years ago with healing, and I personally never found this to be an issue. Most of the time, I'm either targeting the tanks for something single target, which I can then set them to be a really easy to access spot in the party finder list, which can be manually adjusted, mind you, or I just use AoEs to take care of allies, especially in easy content. But in the case of needing to like resurrect, or maybe people make mistakes and need a quick top, the cycling is really quick. I usually do it during the cast time for my previous spell or while my global cooldown is rolling. Now for targeting enemies, you'll press left and right on the D-pad, which really feels like a standard tab target that you would do on keyboard and mouse. There's a ton of settings that you can actually filter through to make tab targeting and these controller targeting settings a lot smoother, and I highly recommend going through this menu and adjusting it to your needs, because honestly, even as keyboard and mouse players, sometimes tab target just doesn't do what I want to do. On controller, you can also access enemies through the aggro list by holding L1 and pressing up and down, which is sometimes nice if there's maybe only 2 or 3 targets to go through and you just want to do a quick swap without having to press left and right on the D-pad. Now for ground target AoEs, I'm not gonna lie, most of the things I would do on controller, I quite frankly would do them on keyboard and mouse as well. There's a macro that you can use that will either drop a ground target at your target's location, and if you don't have a target, it'll drop it at your foot, which most of the time is the only 2 places you're going to be wanting to drop an AoE like that, since that's where you or the other people are. It lets you skip the whole actual ground targeting bit, and then you just need to plan around boss and player positioning instead. Like I said, I know keyboard and mouse players who use this, especially there's one for Shikuchi on Ninja, which lets you just use it as a regular gap closer instead of having to place it on the ground. That's a target macro. That one's great too, and if it's good for keyboard and mouse, it's also going to be good for controller. There are even other macros that keyboard and mouse players use that controller players can make use of all the same. Tanks setting up their party list so they can shirk the other tank with a macro like this. Perhaps you want to set up Dragon Sight macros to auto-use on certain party members as well on Dragoon. Again, this isn't even controller advice, but it just goes to show that settings are more universal than people think they are. There's not this major advantage or disadvantage for picking controller or keyboard and mouse. You can also lock on the targets with the controller by pressing L3. Now, that's not something that's exclusive to them, but it's something that feels like a controller motion. I don't know why. I guess maybe it's just because of me growing up with controllers. I kind of associated to that. Final Fantasy XI in particular. I kind of like this on melee jobs for rotating around and using positionals, but when you go to dodge AoEs, it's pretty awkward, so I don't recommend staying in this mode if you use it at all. Feel free to hop in and out, but watch those AoEs. It gets kind of scary. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think everything works perfectly on controller, but the few things it doesn't do well are minute. Targeting alliance members is one such thing. By holding the left bumper and pressing left or right on the D-pad, you can cycle through your alliance's party members. It's rare you ever have to do this outside of maybe trying to save another alliance with a raise or something, but when you know this, you know, it's a small thing to have to do occasionally, but it's just not as smooth for me as keyboard and mouse. There's also something I do as a keyboard and mouse player called clicking off buffs. Basically, you can cancel positive effects like regens or shields by clicking them. It's very rare you need to do this, but for controller, you would have to make a quick macro to remove said beneficial effect. It's something you'll seldom interact with, but again, at least now you know about it. Also, voice comms. Now, it might not be the first thing you think of with controller support, but using voice comms is definitely something you have to consider how you're going to do it. On console, most people I know use their phones to join Discord for high-end rating and plug like a little headphone into it or something. On PC, I've seen people do all sorts of things. Some people I know just bind one of their controller buttons, like maybe the DS4 touchpad or something, to push to talk. Some people have fancy controllers with all sorts of like extra paddles and stuff. Some people I know just hold their controller really close to the keyboard and then like lean on it in order to press their push to talk. My favorite, somebody who I raided with during World Progression, they bought a gas pedal that you would use for like a racing game, and they push down on that as their push to talk button with controller. That's my recommended play. That's some big brain stuff right there. Now, above all else, I've given you all these tools, I've given you all these recommendations, these settings you can do, but the biggest thing is comfort level. Me, I suck. I have no practice on the cross hotbar. It would not be my preferred way to raid, and that's because I just have way more years experience with keyboard and mouse and MMOs. Maybe if I sat down and practiced, though, I could probably get the hang for it. Like I said, I did a whole YouTube series on it. But I see people who are wizards with the cross hotbar, and honestly, it's super impressive. They raid on the highest levels, and if you are comfortable with the cross hotbar with the controller gameplay, you should stick with it. It won't inhibit you at all from enjoying the game to its fullest. Who knows? Maybe you're a cross hotbar wizard too, Harry. And with that, that's going to be a wrap for my hotbar, cross hotbar appreciation video. Whatever this was, I guess it's over now. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I will see you all in the next one. Until then, take care.